In today's video, I'm going to talk about how I took this owl artwork and digitized it into this sketchy line work type embroidery design. On the right, we can see the original design, which is just a simple line art sketch of an owl. And on the left-hand side, we can see my version of the digitized owl. And then if we move over here, we can see what the owl looks like once it's been actually stitched out on the machine. Now, one thing with this design I was worried about was I thought that maybe there was too much detail in the original artwork that it wouldn't translate well to an embroidery design. We can see there's lots of pen marks, and the texture is kind of created by the different direction of the pen strokes. And I was worried this would not translate well to an embroidery design and it would kind of just end up being a big mess. But I was kind of surprised that it turned out pretty well. And in the final product, when it did stitch out, you can see all the details very clearly. For example, the feathers are very defined. We can see the feet and the wood piece that the owl is standing on. And also in the face, we didn't lose any detail there, so we can still distinguish the eyes, the ears, and the beak. So when I digitized this, I started in the eyes and then I kind of went around, did the beak, the ears, and then went in a kind of up and down motion along the body. So if we do the playback, you can kind of see the path I took. And aside from the eyes, there really are no jump threads, meaning I made sure to make it so the thread's not jumping around, which is ensuring it runs faster and I'm not having to spend time afterwards cutting threads. Another thing to note is this probably took me about 2 hours in total to digitize from start to finish, and it's about 33,000 stitches. When digitizing a very detailed design such as this, you want to make sure you're not digitizing it too small. So I made sure to make the size the largest my hoop would support. And for my machine, the largest I could go was a 6 by 10 inches hoop. So I made sure when I was enlarging the image to make it go all the way to the ends. Otherwise, if it was too small, it wouldn't look as good. Now, I'm not going to show the process from start to finish on how I actually digitize this because it's pretty much the same technique all throughout. So I'm just going to show a couple areas to get the idea of how you could go about digitizing something like this. So the techniques I'm showing in this video are pretty much identical to what I did in my last video when I actually showed from start to finish how I digitized the skull and the sword. That is a much more simple design. Um, and when you look at this owl compared to the skull, you might think, well, the owl must have been a lot harder, but it actually was the same. If anything, it just took longer. So it might look hard, but it actually is very easy. So I'm going to be digitizing some parts over the owl design I have here, the original artwork. A couple things to note. So one, you want to make sure you're digitizing at a set scale. I've said this before as well. Usually I'll either do 300 or 600, meaning I'm zooming in 600%, and that's the max. So because of the detail here, I will zoom in to 600. This is the most I will be zooming in while I'm digitizing. If you zoom in more than this, then the screen may look bigger and you might find it easier to digitize the detail, but because you're zoomed in so much, when you put all that detail in and zoom back out to 100, it's going to be kind of a mess, and all those stitches you put down won't really show through. So make sure you don't go more than 600 is a good standard to use. So when I have in Hatch, I'm using on the left hand side freehand open shape selected. When you have that selected, it's basically just like drawing. So right now I have, instead of a mouse, I'm using a pen made for the tablet, and I can kind of just draw as I would like a piece of paper. If you do not have a pen tablet, you can still use the plain digitize open shape. You're just going to be clicking instead of drawing. So for example, if I was doing the digitize open shape with a mouse, you know, it's the same concept. You're just clicking For example, here I'm curving and going up. So it's just a different motion, but it's the same process, and you can certainly create the same look that I have with a pen tablet or a mouse. So to get started, I'll show how I started it, and then I'll go into a few key areas, maybe such as the ears up here, and then how I got that detail into the feather. So I started it on the eye, and with the running stitch, I just kind of made some pretty close together lines to make a full circle. And then from here, I pick up the pen and then I will start into around the eye. So it's really just going back and forth. And as I'm going around the eye, I'll kind of make decisions on when I want to go in and pick up some of these details here. Like here we can see around the eye, there are these heavy marks, and I can kind of go wherever I want and then come back into the eye and finish it. Another thing to note here is I'm not following the artwork 100%, meaning I'm not copying every single line that the artwork shows. Because this is very sketchy and almost a messy look, you kind of have the freedom to skip some lines or add some lines when needed. So for example, we can see right here, we can see there is not a continuous line between the eye and the hair up here. I can actually choose to make that a continuous line because I don't want to have a bunch of jump stitches, and it really doesn't change the picture that much. So it's up to you to decide. Here's another example. As I'm doing the hairs up here, we can see there's a break between here and here. I decide just to make that a continuous line, and if you're not looking at the original artwork, you kind of never will tell. So it looks really messy, and when I first started this, I kind of thought this is going to be a big mess, but I didn't give up and I kept going through, and it actually works out in the end. So you kind of have to just trust the process. Because the artwork is very messy, your stitches will look messy and you might be doubting yourself, but just hold out and keep going through the whole thing. So that's kind of how I started it with the eyes, and I would kind of just pick and choose. For example, I would come up here and I would kind of make up where the lines are connecting. And if I'm coming down here, and then I decided to go into the other eye. At some point I stop and then I have to have a jump thread in order to make the second pupil, and then I can go back to where I was and finish. So I would come up and then go down, do some details, and then figure out how to get back up to where I was. And every now and then, as I'm making the design, I would zoom out to 100% and hide my artwork just to kind of get an idea and reassure myself that it actually does look good, even though up close it looks like a mess of scribbles. Once you zoom out and see the full picture, it starts to look pretty good. And then I'll show how I kind of went into the ears. So the ears are, I think, one of the only spots that isn't, it seems to be like a fully colored in area. And again, here I'm only using the running stitch, but I was able to make it look like a full stitch. So we can kind of see there are some directions that the hairs of the ears are going. And I just made sure when I was basically pretend like you're coloring it in with a marker, I just made sure to follow those directions. So if I'm starting down here and I come into the ear, I just start making big long strokes, keeping in mind the direction of the hairs based on how it was drawn. So now we can see it's kind of curving and come out here, and then it straightens out a little. And I'm not trying to do 100% coverage, so it's okay if you can kind of still see some white and black in the background. That's fine because that's the look we're going for. This is not meant to be a fill stitch. It's supposed to look sketchy. And then once that finished, I came up here and I did these ears. And again, you can see these lines aren't connected, but when I was digitizing it, because I don't want jump stitches, I just kind of made them connect and it still looks fine. And then I came around here and I did the other ear the same way. And when I hide the image to see what's going on, you can see there's still some white gaps, but that's fine because it gives it that sketchy look. So I didn't pay too much attention to that. And then lastly, just going down in here to the feathers. So the feathers, especially when you're zoomed in, it definitely looks like a mess. And I did have to concentrate a little to make sure I wasn't getting lost. But with the feathers, similar to how we did the ears, you just want to look at the direction that the pen strokes are going and mimic that. For example, we can see every feather has a kind of curve, and that's highlighting the individual feather. When we're digitizing, we just make sure to emphasize those curves of the feather so they stand out. So let's say I'm coming down here and I'm doing these feathers. I'll alternate between doing the outline of a feather and the details that are inside. So here we can see a feather, we got the curves, and then we have these squiggly line details. When I'm doing the curves, I'm making sure to go over it a couple times to get that definition. And there's really no right or wrong way to do this. If I digitize this owl 5 times, I guarantee you they'll all look slightly different with different strokes. And I may be missing some lines, but that's fine too. It's kind of just scribbling, organized scribbling. And then we can hide the artwork. And if we zoom out, you'll see it looks a little better. Same thing goes for the tail feathers. Now the tail feathers we can see down here are also a different shape. We can see we have these dark scribbles, and then we have a couple light scribbles, and then dark scribbles, and then we have the curve of the feather. So there's really no right or wrong way to do it. And just to show you what it would look like if I was using a normal mouse, I'm going to switch over to Digitize Open Shape. Instead of drawing, I'm just going to be clicking. So if I'm starting right here, I can do a bunch of straight lines, and then we'll place them down, and then I can come down, do some curves, and get into these details. It might take a little longer if you're using a mouse, but it's going to give you the same look in the end. And that's really all there is to the process. It's pretty much just one technique. And as you can see, I only did a couple areas, but if you were to continue doing what I did, you would end up with something similar to the owl I have here on the left. And again, it stitches out beautifully. So I encourage you to go out there and find some great sketchy artwork, and don't be scared no matter how complicated it is. It's just one stitch at a time you're drawing, and I'm sure it'll turn out great. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more videos regarding embroidery digitizing.